They called them Kamikaze, the divine wind. To some, the name carried echoes of an ancient legend where storms saved Japan from invaders. To others, it became a word for a very modern kind of terror, a plane falling from the sky with no intent to turn back. But behind the term were nearly 4,000 young men, sons, brothers, lovers, who climbed into cockpits knowing they would never climb out. Their lives ended in flashes of metal, fire, and seawater, leaving behind fragments of letters, photographs, and stories that speak far louder than the propaganda of the time. This is the untold truth of how nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots died. Late 1944, the Pacific War had eaten islands, ships, and men. Japan had lost ground, oil was scarce, and factories sputtered under blockade. The leadership faced a daunting choice: fight on conventionally and likely lose swiftly, or try something so extreme it might shake the enemy's rhythm. The result was the special attack. Planes turned into human-guided bombs, pilots trained to steer their aircraft into ships. It was a tactic born of desperation and ideology. They weren't mythical figures. They were 20-year-olds with futures. Some joined because they believed in defending homeland and emperor. Others joined because commanders made refusal seem impossible. Training was often abbreviated. Many pilots had flown only a handful of missions before being assigned a suicide attack. The aircraft themselves were sometimes patched and overused, not the sleek machines you might imagine, but worn craft pushed to do a job they were never meant for. People often ask, were they volunteers? The reality is complicated. Japanese society emphasized honor and duty. Peer pressure and social expectations were enormous. In some units, commanders made it clear that refusing was shameful or would bring dishonor to family. In other cases, individuals truly volunteered, moved by patriotism or grief. The truth sits in the middle. A mixture of genuine sacrifice and social coercion drove thousands into the air. Kamikaze missions were simple in plan and horrifying in execution. Pilots took off with planes stripped of anything unnecessary, sometimes with extra fuel tanks or explosives bolted on. Instructions were straightforward: find an allied ship, dive, and strike a critical area like the bridge, magazine, or engine room. There was no plan for return. The pilots had only seconds in the final approach to correct aim. Interception by guns or fighters remained a constant risk. Many never reached their targets because of flak, fighters, or mechanical failures. It's important to separate shock from strategic impact. Kamikaze attacks did sink ships and damage many others. They could cripple a vessel's ability to fight or to move, and the psychological terror they induced among sailors was real and profound. However, these attacks did not change the course of the war. They bought time in places, inflicted casualties, and forced tactical changes, but they could not roll back industrial might or resupply lines. Still, for those on the receiving end, a single plane could mean sudden, terrible loss. Nearly 4,000 died carrying out these missions. By late 1944 and into 1945, Japanese manufacturing was strained. Engines failed, airframes were worn, radios broke. Training hours were cut because fuel was scarce. Allied air and naval forces dominated much of the sea, intercepting or harrying pilots before they reached targets. And crucially, the mission design meant death was the intended outcome. There was no expectation of survival. Combined, these factors made the kamikaze effort tragically mortal for almost everyone involved. Numbers flatten tragedy. The human moments pierce it. Imagine a young man writing home. A quick note folded and sealed. Words about a sister's laughter, a favor for a neighbor, a last polite apology for worry. Or picture a sailor on an American ship who sees a plane drop from the sky, hears an explosion, and later writes, "We lost 3 men today." Not all suffering was one-sided. Sailors who survived kamikaze strikes carried physical scars and nightmares. Chaplains conducted burials at sea. On some ships, ordinary tasks stopped as crews tended to the wounded or gathered the dead. Veterans later described the smell of burning gasoline and the surreal sight of a plane becoming an instrument of death. For them, the kamikaze was not an abstract tactic, but a lived horror that echoed for years. History resists tidy labels. Some accounts depict kamikaze pilots as noble martyrs defending homeland and family. Others see them as victims of a militarized culture that weaponized youth. Both take over simplify. Many pilots showed courage, many were also coerced. The real lesson is to hold both truths: the existence of honor and the presence of abuse. When policy compels self-destruction, the line between voluntary sacrifice and exploitation disappears. After surrender, families tried to gather pieces. Memorials rose in towns with wooden slats and quiet stones. Some communities honored pilots as heroes. Others refused to forget the human cost. Across the ocean, Allied veterans and civilian families processed their own losses. The war's psychological toll did not end with the ceasefire. Decades later, meetings between former enemies sometimes involved moments of shared grief and mutual recognition of loss. Behind every mission, towns felt the absence. Mothers kept uniforms folded in cedar chests. These ordinary acts of remembrance. When we see faces behind tactics, policy debates gain weight. We learn that strategic choices ripple into kitchens and schools and funerals. The nearly 4,000 deserve remembrance not to sanctify war, but to insist that human costs remain part of any calculation.